They were so hungry that they ate her with potatoes. 16-year-old Karina was from Russia and she was dating 20-year-old Maxim, who was the lead singer of his band. She was so in love with him that she would sneak around to see him so that her mom wouldn't catch her. On this specific day, Karina told her mom that she was going to be spending the night at a friend's house so that she could study, when in reality she was going to be spending the night at her boyfriend's house. Her mom told her it was fine, but that she needed to be back home by 7 a.m. the next morning, but sadly that wouldn't be the case. In January of 2009, Maxim and his friends decided that they were going to host a party at his house, and Karina wanted to be there and spend the night. During the night of that party, everything seemed like it was going well. It was a lot of fun, and one of Maxim's roommates named Ekaterina was going to walk to her bedroom to go to sleep when she noticed that Maxim and Karina went into the bathroom together. After a while, she started to hear splashes of water and noise, but didn't think too much of it. A while later, Ekaterina woke up and noticed that they were still in the bathroom, so she decided she was going to check in on them to make sure that they were okay. And as she was walking towards that bathroom, another friend named Yuri told her that she wouldn't want to go in there. Ekaterina figured that nothing serious was going on, so she just went back to bed. Next day, Ekaterina arrived home from work. Maxim and Yuri offered her some meat and potatoes, so she ate her meal and didn't have any complaints. But this meat wasn't any kind of ordinary meat. It was the meat of Karina. The night before, Maxim and Yuri had put Karina in the bathtub, drowned her, and once she was deceased, they chopped her up, cooked her meat, and prepared it as a meal. Eventually, Maxim and Yuri were caught, and when they were interrogated, they were asked on why they even did this in the first place, and they stated it was because they were drunk and hungry. The rest of Karina's body parts were placed in plastic bags and scattered around the city. Maxim and Yuri were arrested and charged with Karina's murder.
This disturbing human experiment proved something terrifying about you, because normal people thought they were killing someone and kept going. It was the early 60s at Yale University, and students thought they were signing up for a memory test. They'd get paid to basically sit in a room all afternoon. It felt like easy money. They had no idea what they truly signed up for, though, because this guy, Stanley Milgram, was desperate to prove something about human behavior. He wanted to prove that when faced with an authority figure, people would just obey rules regardless of how they felt about it, even if it was at someone else's expense. But surely no one would be expected to kill somebody in the experiment, right? Well, wrong. Well, not wrong, but they thought that they were killing someone. That's the important part. That's why this was so disturbing. The volunteers were basically made to be teachers, and they thought that other volunteers were being learners. Now, the learner was actually an actor. They were in on the whole thing. Volunteers/teachers thought that this was going to be a memory test to see if electric shocks helped people remember word pairs. If the learner got an answer wrong, they'd be made to give them a little electric shock. But each time they got one wrong, the voltage went up. The buttons were labelled with warnings from slight shock all the way to danger severe shock. When the learner got an answer wrong, the teacher pressed the button and would hear them go, ow. But gradually, as the shocks got worse, they'd start to cry out in pain. And you could tell that these participants really did not feel comfortable with doing the shocks when it got more and more painful. As the shouts got louder, they seemed visibly distressed. But the guy in a white coat next to them, who was conducting this whole experiment, would tell them to carry on. He would simply say things like, "Please continue," or "The experiment requires that you continue." Every single participant actually stopped to get reassurance from the experimenter at least once, but most just carried on after being prompted by him. Now, you'd think, wouldn't you, that once the learner started screaming out, begging to be released, begging for the experiment to stop, that the electric shocks would stop, right? You think that the teacher would say, "Actually, I'm out," even if a bloke in a lab coat was telling you to continue. Well, actually, no. A shocking 65% of people carried on and delivered what they thought to be a fatal electric shock, just because somebody in a lab coat told them to. The screams and banging got louder and louder and louder until finally it went silent. They genuinely thought that they might have killed somebody, and they carried on going. The experiment proved something really interesting about human behavior, because it wasn't that people were cruel. They weren't enjoying doing these electric shocks. In fact, they were in distress themselves. Some of them had their heads in their hands. But the terrifying thing is that ordinary people will just obey authority, whether it goes against their morals or not. Knowing this, be honest, do you think you would have stopped the experiment? If you're fascinated by this stuff like I am, I actually covered a really interesting interesting case on my podcast the other day, The Bourne Investigation. It's about the Stanford prison experiment, so if you are interested, check that out on Apple Podcasts or Spotify.
She sat on her foster son to teach him a lesson. 10-year-old Dakota Levi Stevens was a foster child. He weighed about 90 pounds and was 4 feet 10 inches. He spent nearly 5 years moving in and out of foster homes, both him and his sister. This occurred after their father passed away in 2021 and their mother gave up her parental rights. They did have relatives that could take care of them and they tried to adopt them together but were unsuccessful. For about a month, Dakota was in the care of 48-year-old Jennifer Lee Wilson, and that was his foster mother, and she was about 340 pounds and 4'11". On April 25th of 2024, around 3:37 p.m., a 911 call came in from Liberty Township, Indiana. When first responders arrived, they found 10-year-old Dakota lying on the ground, unresponsive, no pulse, and not breathing. His condition was very critical, so he was airlifted to a children's hospital, but unfortunately passed away 2 days later. When Jennifer spoke with police, she told them that Dakota was acting bad all day, he didn't want to do his chores, and then eventually he left the house. Once Dakota left that home, he walked a few blocks over to a neighbor's house, and he told that neighbor to please adopt him because his foster parents hit him in the face and they wouldn't let him call his caseworker. The neighbor stated that she didn't see any visible injuries but could tell he was very scared. Jennifer showed up to that neighbor's house and told her to mind her own business and then took Dakota back home. Once they made it back home, Dakota refused to get out of the car, and once he finally did, he screamed that he was going to leave again, and Jennifer tried to stop him. Jennifer told investigators she wasn't sure if she had tackled him or if they both fell down, but she was trying to restrain him. Luckily, her Ring doorbell camera captured everything that happened. It showed Jennifer lying across Dakota's midsection near his neck and head. At first, Dakota tried to fight back as much as he could, but Jennifer was on him for about 5 minutes. Mind you, he's only 90 pounds and she's 340 pounds. Once Dakota stopped moving, Jennifer asked him, "Are you faking it?" And once she got no response from him, she rolled him over and saw that his eyelids were pale, began CPR, and called 911. Dakota's cause of death was reported as mechanical asphyxia, and his manner of death was reported as a homicide. Jennifer pled guilty to reckless homicide, and by January 17th of 2025, she was sentenced to 6 years in prison.
They locked her in a van and took turns SAing her at a high school graduation party. 3 18-year-old boys, John Clary III, Kevin Nemick, and Zachary Mascalo, parked a minivan outside of their classmates' graduation party. The 3 boys confined one of their classmates in the van against her will, then physically restrained her, not letting her leave the van. Each of the 3 boys took turns SAing the 18-year-old victim inside the van. The victim was finally able to escape after her friends tracked her phone and found her inside the van. The victim was hysterically crying when her friends found her, and witnesses saw the victim sobbing as she fled the vehicle. All 3 of the boys have pleaded not guilty, which is crazy. John's defense suggested that any contact between the individuals was consensual, which is obviously not true. The boys have not been sentenced yet because this case is still in the pre-trial phase. Kevin remains in custody, but John and Zachary are on pre-trial release, which means that they're out in the world and free to do whatever they want, which is disgusting. This case was brought to my attention in my comments section, and I had never heard about it until then. It is crazy to me that this case is not being pushed out more. But what do you guys think about this case?
This 12-year-old boy's therapy pig was fatally shot by his neighbors, and they were getting ready to butcher and cook the pig when his family caught them. His name's Garrett Cox, and he's from Hodgson, Georgia. He has ADHD and autism, so the family decided to get him the pig for emotional support and companionship. And as you can see, when they first got her, she was just a piglet. The family said that last week they noticed the pig, whose name is Bootsy, had gotten out, so they started to look around for her, and suddenly they heard a gunshot, so they started walking towards that direction. And they ended up at this nearby home, and what they saw was absolutely horrifying. They saw 3 neighbors standing beside Bootsy's body, and they were all wearing apron and gloves next to a large pot of scalding hot boiling water, leading them to believe they were getting ready to butcher and then cook the pig. Garrett's dad said there was a rope with blood on it next to Bootsy's body, so he thinks that they restrained her before they killed her. And Garrett's mom, Carrie, said that she looked at them and said, "Why would you do this? You knew that she was our pig," and apparently they just laughed at her. These are the three neighbors. I'm not even going to try to say their names, but you can see them there. They were all arrested and charged with aggravated animal cruelty. They tried telling police that they didn't know somebody owned the pig and that they thought she was a wild animal. But Garrett's mom said that doesn't even make sense because, as you can see, she has livestock tags on her ears, which means she obviously lives at a farm. His parents also said that she was very well known in the community. She was an award-winning pig. Bootsy is now buried on the property, and I feel so horrible for this little boy. He said that she made him so happy, and he misses her terribly.
I will never get over this last photo ever captured of Rasheem Carter and how he was running for his life shortly before he disappeared. He would be found 1 month later, his head severed from his dismembered body, yet Mississippi police say no foul play is involved. But the way I see it, this man was literally hunted down and killed, and for some reason, it seems like it's being covered up. So let's talk about it. Rasheem Carter was 25 years old when he mysteriously disappeared on October 2nd, 2022. He had recently moved to Taylorsville, Mississippi for a new job as a contractor at the Georgia Pacific Mill. He and another contractor at the same job decided to room up together and stay at the Super 8 Motel in Laurel, which is about 30 miles away from the job site. This worked out really great because Rasheem's car had recently broken down, so his coworker would give him a ride to and from work since they were going to the same place. Everything seemed to be going great, but in the days leading up to his disappearance, Rasheem would text his mom and tell her that he was having some trouble with a few people that he worked with, and that if she suddenly stopped hearing from him, these coworkers were responsible. Fast forward to October 1st, 2022. Rasheem and his coworker/roommate got into an argument. What about has never been revealed, but it was severe enough for his coworker to refuse giving him a ride back to the motel, and he actually ended up leaving without Rasheem. I'm assuming after this, Rasheem started to walk back to the motel when, out of nowhere, he called his mom in a panic and told her that he had just been chased into a Family Dollar store in Taylorsville by 3 trucks full of white men. He was scared for his life and told his mom, quote, "If something happens to me, start here." End quote. His mom, who lived in a different state, did her best to try and calm him down, and she told him to go into a police station to wait it out and wait for the men to leave, so that's what Rasheem did. He walked into the Taylorsville Police Department and told them everything that had happened and that he was scared for his life. He also asked if they could possibly escort him or give him a ride back to the Super 8 Motel in Laurel, but Taylorsville PD said no because it was out of their jurisdiction and in another county. They then turned him away, and what happened after this has never been explained. It's not known where Rasheem went after this or where he slept that night since he never made it back to the motel, but the next morning, which was now October 2nd, he went back to the Taylorsville Police Department and told them that he was now being stalked and threatened by a group of white men, and he was extremely scared. He asked them to please help him, but they once again said no and made him leave the station. As he left, he called his mom one last time, and one of the last things he ever said to her was, quote, "Mom, I'm not crazy," end quote. Seeing as though his mom lived in a different state, she couldn't just easily get to him, so she once again tried calming him down, and then she tried to see if she knew anyone in the area who could possibly go and pick him up and get him off the street. But not long after this, Rasheem disappeared, and there would be no clue as to what happened to him until a month later. On November 1st, the Smith County Sheriff's Office called Rasheem's mom and asked her if she could take a look at an image caught by a hunter's trail camera. This was really odd to her because this was in the middle of the woods, and surely Rasheem wouldn't have been all the way out there, right? But once she looked at the video, she immediately knew it was Rasheem. The video showed Rasheem running for his life without a shirt and carrying a large stick, so authorities then began searching for him in the area, and the next day, his partial remains were found at the Deer Creek Park off of Highway 37. This was 1 mile south of Taylorsville. Over the next few months, more of Rasheem's remains would be found in the area, including on someone's property in Taylorsville. His head had been severed from his body, and his spinal cord was found in a separate area from his head. Also found in the area were Rasheem's pants that held his ATM card, his cash, and his phone charger. The second his remains were found, the Smith County Sheriff's Office released a statement saying there was no reason to believe foul play was involved. And sadly, because of this, there really wasn't ever an investigation to begin with. I don't get how authorities can say no foul play is suspected when his head was literally severed from his body. That and the fact that right before he went missing, he was being chased down by a group of white men. He even begged the police for help on 2 separate occasions before he disappeared, but this still happened, and I'm just not buying that no foul play was involved. This case was soon handed over to the FBI, but according to them, even though they performed a forensic examination on his body, they still couldn't determine a cause or manner of death for Rasheem. Rasheem's murder gained national attention, so of course people were demanding answers, but specifically from Taylorsville PD, who turned Rasheem away before he was killed, not once, but twice. Taylorsville PD went on to say, quote, "It didn't happen in our city limits, so Taylorsville is not responsible for it. This case probably won't be solved. It seems like a freak accident." end quote. Their explanation is that Rashim was killed by a wild animal, and their logic is that they truly don't think anyone in their community could have done something like that. A deputy with the Taylorsville PD even went on to say, quote, maybe he was on PCP or something, end quote. This response is absolutely sickening, and so is the lack of investigation into this case. It doesn't take a genius to know the history Taylorsville had, and probably still has to this day. What's really telling to me is the fact that people in the town are scared to talk about what happened to Rashim, and that pretty much sums it up for me. Rashim had a 7-year-old daughter who just wants to know what happened to her dad. She still calls his phone just to talk to him. It's now been 2 years, and although what exactly happened to Rashim and who was responsible is still a mystery, I think we can all agree that this was not accidental, and something truly sinister happened to him out there in those woods.
She ended her son's life over his sexuality. 17-year-old Itaberly Lozano lived with his mother Tatiana, stepfather, and younger sibling in Brazil. From photos, it seemed like they were a happy family, but it was far from that. When Itaberly came out to his mother telling her that he was gay, their relationship deteriorated. She was not willing to accept that, and she wanted nothing to do with him. Because of this, it resulted in her beating him, and she would tell men from the neighborhood that if they were ever to see him, to beat him as well. This would cause endless fights, so Itaberly decided just to stay with his grandmother for a bit. On December 29th of 2018, Itaberly received a phone call from his mother asking for him to go over so that they could talk in person and reconcile. He was very happy about this because he loved his mother so much and he was hoping that things would just turn around, but he was wrong. When Itaberly arrived at her home, he was greeted by 2 men, Victor and Miller de Silva. They were hitmen hired by his mom so that they could teach her son a lesson. These men beat Itaberly, but they refused to unalive him, so Tatiana grabbed a kitchen knife and did it herself. Tatiana and her husband took Itaberly's body to a cane field and lit it on fire. His body was found about a week later, and forensic investigation was needed in order to identify his body. When Tatiana was brought in for questioning, she stated it wasn't because she was homophobic, it was because apparently her son would bring home men, do substances, and even try to unalive her. The 2 men were sentenced to 21 years and 8 months in prison, and Tatiana was sentenced to 25 years and 8 months in prison.
Before she became the most notorious female serial killer in the entire country, she was a little girl sleeping in the woods, selling her own body to grown men just to eat some food. Like, imagine that is how your life starts. On the literal dirt floor with no one protecting you, just surviving on your own body. Welcome to my series, Serial Killers from Every State, and today we are going to the cold side of Florida. Eileen Wuornos was born in February 1956 in Michigan, and I swear from the second she came out of that womb, the world was completely against her. Her mom was 16 at the time, and her father was a full-blown predator in jail for harming children. And by the time she was 4, he was already dead by self-inflicted means. So she never even knew him, but like, maybe that was a blessing because that is not someone a kid should be around. And her mom, she didn't stay long either. She abandoned Eileen and her brother Keith when they were little, and they just got dumped off at their grandparents like, good luck. But these were not the sweet, loving type of grandparents. No, these people were half the time and angry the other half, and her grandfather would constantly beat her, like badly. He'd call her disgusting names that no child should ever have to hear, and at one point he forced her to watch him drown their kitten. I'm sorry, what kind of monster does that, and why do animals always end up suffering in these stories? By the time she was 11, she was basically homeless, living behind their house and doing whatever she could just to survive. And I'm not exaggerating when I say she was selling her body for food. Sometimes it was boys her age, and sometimes it was older men. But what makes me also want to throw up is that her older brother and grandfather were also assaulting her, so she literally had no safe space. And then at 14, she got pregnant because a family friend forced himself onto her. And instead of someone saying, oh my god, we need to protect this child, they sent her away to some home for unwed mothers like she was the problem, like she's the shameful one. She gives birth in secret to a baby boy, and they take him away immediately, and she never sees him again. And when she comes back home, her grandmother had passed away, and so her grandfather took that as the perfect opportunity to kick her out of the house for good. He just abandons her like she meant absolutely nothing. So now she's 15 with no home, no education, and no family. So Eileen decides, well, she doesn't decide, she is literally forced to drop out of school and start hitchhiking across the country. She starts living under bridges, behind gas stations, at truck stops, and just doing the only thing that she knows how to do to survive, selling her body to creepy old men. And it breaks my heart to know how normal it became came for her. Like, nobody ever stepped in and said, hey, you deserve better than this. And this goes on for years. She gets arrested over and over again, but not for hurting anyone. It was always for things like stealing food, forging checks, getting into fights, literally just surviving the only way that she could. And nobody asked why. Why is this little girl always on the streets? They just threw her in jail, let her back out, and waited for her to mess up again. By her early 20s, she meets this man named Louis Fell. And boy, is he old, like needs a cane old, like 40 years older than her old. But he's wealthy, so she marries him. And for a second, it looked like her life was finally about to get better, but nope. She ends up getting violent and starts hitting him with his own cane, and so he got a restraining order against her. Which is like, I'm sorry, but getting beat with your own cane is wild work. She ends up back on the street, still getting arrested, still surviving in the same way. Until 10 years later, she meets Tyria Moore. Ty was the first person who genuinely wanted Eileen. Not for a night, not for a transaction, but as a partner. Eileen keeps working the highway to support them, taking rides from men to make more cash. But one night in 1989, everything changes. A man named Richard Mallory picks her up, and this is where it all starts. Eileen says he hurt her, that he tried to force himself onto her. She panicked, she fought back, and did what she had to do. In that moment, she pulls out a weapon and ends his life. Now, if that was the whole story, I'd be like, yeah, girl, defend yourself, period. But then another man ends up dead, and then another, and another. Over the next year, 7 men are no longer alive, all in similar ways. Shots multiple times, left on the side of the road, naked or half naked, completely robbed. And now people are starting to ask questions, but Eileen, she kept saying that it was self-defense, that she was attacked. And the more that it happened, the harder it was to believe it was always self-defense. Especially when you look at who some of the victims were. One of them was a former cop, another a church volunteer. Others had no criminal history whatsoever, and it just wasn't adding up. And then one day, Eileen and Ty had crashed one of the stolen cars that she had taken, and a couple of witnesses saw this and reported it. The cops get a description of the women, they start piecing up all their evidence, and they track down Eileen and arrest her. They bring her in for questioning, but she's still saying the same thing. They attacked me, I defended myself. But the police, they want a confession, and they know exactly how to get it. They go to Ty and they tell her, you won't get arrested if you help us. So Ty calls Eileen saying that she's scared and she needs to know what is happening, and Eileen, she breaks. She said, I did it. I'm so sorry. I did not want you to get in trouble. And she just confesses to everything, taking the fall all on her own. Eileen sits through trial after trial, and in the end, she gets sentenced to death in prison. Not once, not twice, but 6 separate death sentences. And after a whole decade on death row, they ask if she wants her final meal. She said no. Like, what? You don't even want a final meal? I would have gone full buffet, I'm sorry. But then her final words were, I'm sailing with the rock, I'll be back like Independence Day with Jesus. I don't even know what to do with that. But on October 9th, 2002, at 46 years old, Eileen was officially executed by lethal injection. And look, I'm not saying that she's innocent, but what I am saying is this world failed her long before she failed anyone else. Do I think every murder was self-defense? Honestly, I don't know. But I do know this. If someone had helped that little girl in the woods instead of ignoring her, maybe none of this would have happened. Either way, take care of yourselves. Please, I love you. Mwah, group hug.
He was the original Jeffrey Dahmer before Jeffrey Dahmer, so why has no one ever heard of him? Before we get into today's case, if you guys do prefer deep dives, I do post every single week on my podcast, The Born Investigation. I don't usually give loads of context to the background of serial killers. I feel like it looks like I'm making excuses for them. But honestly, this guy was just destined to become a killer from day one. Larry Ayler grew up in Crawfordsville, Indiana, in a very violent household. His dad was constantly beating up his mum in front of him, and Larry and his little siblings too. His mum basically had to work really long hours in order to put food on the table for these kids, but while she was out at work, the dad would just get drunk, pass out, and not even feed the children. And when his mum finally got the courage to leave this awful man, it actually only got worse because she then got with another guy who was equally violent and horrible. Larry's new stepdad would find sick ways to punish the children, including holding their heads under boiling water. Now, Larry couldn't cope with this, as you would expect. I don't think many kids would, but his mum couldn't cope with the fact that he couldn't cope with it, so she sent him away to like a boarding school type school for troubled kids. But he was so distressed there, he had such an awful time there that he would cry to his mum and beg to go back. It was so confusing and traumatizing, honestly, and everything that he was going through just made him a target for bullies at school. Again, not making excuses for him, but it wasn't until years later that everybody realized what a monster he had become. On the 3rd of August 1978, paramedics were called to a gruesome scene. 19-year-old Craig Long lay slumped covered in blood at the side of the road. By some miracle, he was still alive, and as paramedics tended to his wounds, he had a horrifying story to tell them. A man had propositioned him, and when Craig had said no thanks, the man plunged a knife into his chest. It was wild, but even wilder was the fact that as paramedics were tending to his wounds, the man showed up again. It was Larry, and he seemed to have an excuse as to why he'd stabbed this guy. He was like, oh guys, I just wanted to come back and say, like, this whole thing's been a misunderstanding and I actually stabbed him by accident. It very clearly wasn't an accident, and only thanks to Craig's quick thinking, pretending to be dead, playing dead essentially, and then crawling to a house to get help, he managed to stay alive. But infuriatingly, Larry got away with this. He basically never actually ended up being punished for what was clearly an attempted murder, and other men were going to ultimately pay the price for him being set free. Larry started visiting gay bars and picking up men. At first he made a good impression, but once he took them back to his house and things got a bit steamy, he turned very, very violent. He'd wang a knife out and start slashing them or choking them, whether they liked it or not. And he seemed to want more to satisfy his sick needs. In October 1982, Larry targeted another Craig, 21-year-old Craig Townsend. He captured him, he drugged him, and he beat him to a pulp. The man was found lying naked in a field, but again miraculously alive. Larry decided he actually needed to start making sure his victims were dead. Later that month, a passerby was just strolling past a cornfield when they spotted what looked like a mannequin. I think we all know it wasn't a mannequin. It was 19-year-old Stephen Crockett. He'd been lying there dead for 12 hours. He'd been strangled and had 32 stab wounds. This had been a brutal murder. A week later, another brutal murder, and honestly, it was insane the amount of men he'd started killing. Between 1982 and 1984, he'd picked up and murdered a minimum of 21 young men. The community was absolutely horrified. Newspapers were announcing that the highway killer was on the loose. And police had literally never seen this level of violence in seemingly random murders. Some victims had been disemboweled, and some were as young as 14. In September 1983, Larry was actually pulled over for a minor traffic incident. It was nothing much. But when police searched his car, they couldn't believe what was inside. Rope, handcuffs, a hammer, duct tape, 2 baseball bats, and a mallet. It was like a murder kit. They were like, guys, I think we found the highway killer. And a search of his home was just as shocking. He had actually some kind of like medical bill on the side where he'd actually been to A&E for a deep cut to his hand. It all added up. It all made sense. This circumstantial evidence linked him to these murders. But it gets really, really wild because he was arrested, but his legal team were like, nah, the searches that the police conducted, they were illegal. They were like, legally, you've got to let him go. And so they did. He was free, and no prizes for guessing how he celebrated. It was August 1984 when a janitor was emptying bins at a Chicago apartment block. And all of a sudden, the janitor was like, why is this one bag so heavy? So he opened it up and found human body parts. They belonged to little 16-year-old Daniel Bridges. He'd been incredibly vulnerable and had run away from home. Sadly for him, he'd been hanging out near to an apartment where a very dangerous serial killer was living. It was Larry. Now, again, circumstantial evidence. This is the apartment where Larry lives. A dead body has been found. Larry was arrested. And obviously the locals were like, can you please now put this man in jail? He was finally given the death sentence, but did die in 1994 from complications from AIDS.
There's a reason she is considered to be the world's most evil babysitter. She was convicted of 1 murder, but I want to know if you think she was responsible for more. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is Jacqueline Robidoux. Twin sisters Mary and Tina Carpenter were 3.5 years old in April of 1976. The girls were sitting together watching some telly inside of their nana's house in Lawton, Ohio, when they noticed a rattling coming from the door. Turning around, they saw the familiar friendly face of 16-year-old Jacqueline, who they knew as Jackie Boo. Jackie had babysat the girl several times, and she was also a family friend. Jackie coaxed Mary and Tina out of the house and began walking them down the street. Something happened on this walk though. Something made the twin girls want to turn around and go back home, but Jackie wouldn't let them. A witness would later recall watching Jackie as she was dragging both of the girls down the street by their wrists, leading them to an abandoned house. The girls were hysterically crying, and this neighbour didn't intervene because, quote, she didn't want to get involved. Jackie would lead the two children into the abandoned house, which was filled with rubbish and broken furniture. She opened up the fridge and ordered Mary and Tina inside, closing the door, securing it behind them, and that is where they would be trapped for 2 days. They were discovered when some children in the street were playing inside of the abandoned house, and they heard a noise or some whimpering coming from inside of the fridge. One of the little girls that were playing went over and bravely opened the fridge door, and that is when Tina jumped out terrified, gasping for breath, and behind her was the body of Mary. After being locked inside of this fridge for 2 days, 3.5-year-old Mary had suffocated to death due to lack of oxygen. Tina only just managed to survive because she was placed nearby a very small hole or crack within the fridge that seeped a tiny amount of oxygen through. When she was later checked over at the hospital, doctors would find a bite mark on Tina's arm that was from her sister Mary. I honestly cannot imagine how that must have felt for Tina, being trapped in this cold, dark, cramped and confined space, witnessing your sister, your twin sister, suffocating to death right beside you, and they are only 3.5 years old. When police spoke to Tina, she was able to tell them exactly who lured them away from their nana's house and trapped them inside of the fridge to die. It was Jackie Boo, and the family told police that that was a nickname for Jacqueline Robidoux. When questioned, she would deny any sort of involvement, and due to lack of evidence and the very young age of their only witness, they were really unable to proceed with an investigation or to proceed with charging Jackie. So essentially, the investigation into Mary's murder stopped. It's said that sometimes having such a young witness can be incredibly hard due to their age because their memories aren't as reliable, and especially after going through something as traumatic as Tina had. If police took action, however, they could have saved the life of another young girl. George and Rose Carter were a couple in their 20s when they had their daughter, Naima Louise. She was described as a delightful little girl. She had the most beautiful eyes and warm and smile. She was quiet but observant, and at one point she went through this stage where she'd go in the kitchen and pull out all of the kitchen cabinets, piling them on top of one another and using them as stairs climbing up them. Being parents in their 20s while both of them working full time, George and Rose really tried to balance their working life, their parent life with their social life. They still wanted to be able to go to parties, to go out drinking, and to go on date nights whenever they wanted. So occasionally they would hire a babysitter named Jacqueline Robidoux, who Naima absolutely loved. It was said that whenever Jackie came into the home, Naima's face would light up in delight and she would give Jackie the biggest, warmest hugs. On Halloween night 1977, Naima was put to bed in her cot inside of her bedroom between 10:30 and 11 p.m. Just minutes after being put down from the living room where they were sat, George and Rose could hear their daughter crying, but they didn't go to comfort her. George would say in a later interview that they didn't want to spoil the baby, and so they just let her cry it out. Eventually the crying stopped and the couple assumed that Naima had just gone to sleep. When they woke up the next morning, they had actually fell asleep in the living room. Rose went to check on Naima, only to find her cot empty. They didn't immediately worry. They thought that Naima must have just climbed out of her cot and was somewhere in the house hiding. Rose went from room to room, checking everywhere that she thought to. She looked in the kitchen cupboards, in the closet, she even looked outside in the back garden, but the 19-month-old was nowhere to be seen. Inside of the home, there was no sign of forced entry. All of the windows were still locked from the inside and all of the doors bar one, which was a sliding glass door that could only be unlocked from the inside. The gate in the back garden was also open. Detectives and George theorized that the kidnapper must have already been inside of the house, hiding in the closet, waiting for Naima to be put to bed. Naima was then scooped up out of her cot, petted up to calm her crying, and abducted. The kidnapper walking the infant through the tiny house to the sliding glass door and taken off with that, both George and Rose not hearing a single thing. The day before Thanksgiving, so around about a month later, Naima Louise Carter would be found. A man who was in the area visiting one of his friends decided that he wanted to check out an abandoned house that was on his friend's street. He went inside and found that a fridge had fallen over, and next to it was the decomposing body of a baby girl. It was determined that children in the street had been playing inside of the house when they knocked the fridge over. Naima's body had fallen out, and terrified, they took off and apparently didn't say a thing to anyone. Her body was then left for this man to discover her. Naima's cause of death was ruled as asphyxiation. She had suffocated to death after being locked in the fridge shortly after her abduction. George and Rose both fully cooperated with the police, even though it's unthinkable. Sadly, some parents do the worst things to their children. We live in a world where there's Chris Watts and Casey Anthony. But on this occasion, George and Rose were both ruled out. It would be when they mentioned the name of their babysitter, Jackie Robidoux, that the hairs on the detective's back stood up. Again, with this case, they could not gather enough evidence to arrest or even prosecute Jackie for this crime. The detective firmly believes, however, that Jackie was responsible for the abduction and murder of Naima Louise Carter, and the similarities between Naima's case and Mary's case, they were just too coincidental. All of the victims had been babysat by Jackie. They were all abducted from their homes where Jackie would have had a good sense about them. They were all forced into fridges on abandoned streets that Jackie had connections to. Jacqueline Robidoux would eventually be arrested, charged and convicted for the murder of 3.5-year-old Mary Carpenter, which she received a life sentence for. This happened a good few years later, and a now older Tina was able to testify against Jackie along with other witnesses, and they had found more evidence. During the trial, the prosecutors would actually use Naima's case as evidence to show patterns in Jackie's behaviour, despite her never being charged in connection to Naima. And to this day, she never has been. So many people believe that Jackie Robidoux is Naima Louise Carter's abductor and murderer. One person who doesn't think that, though, is George Carter, Naima's father. He said, quote, "The Jackie Robidoux we knew? No, it just doesn't add up. I never sensed that about her. Whenever Jackie came over, Naima would run up to her and give her a hug. Was it someone we knew? I think so. Someone who was familiar with our house, but I've never been fully convinced that it was Jackie." In the April before Naima was abducted, some strange things had been happening to the Carter family. The family dog had been poisoned, and the family home had actually been broken into and completely ransacked. Whoever did this had stolen lots of photos of Naima and then scattered them all around the house outside. George believes that those events followed by Naima's disappearance and murder are no coincidence, and that they must be connected. Jackie would die in prison at 49 years old from liver cancer. She never admitted whether she had any involvement in Naima's case. Comment down below and let me know what you think. Do you think that Jackie could have been involved in the abduction and murder of Naima Louise Carter, making her a double child murderer, or could someone else be responsible?
If there's just one piece of advice I would give you, it's to act fast in these situations. The reason killers have been caught, and in some cases victims found alive, is because of how fast people acted on gut instinct. The kidnapper or killer just didn't have enough time. They sounded the alarm with Chris Watts so fast he barely had a second to breathe. Shanann's friend Nicole knew Shanann's diary like the back of her hand, so much so that the second she failed to attend a doctor's appointment, she immediately knew something was wrong. She rang police, they got over to the house, and Chris was like a deer in headlights. He hadn't got rid of his wife's phone yet. He also hadn't got round to cleaning up the scene in the house. The bed was all disheveled still. It all pointed towards him being guilty. He didn't have a second to hide evidence, and you can see the panic on his face in the body cam footage. In the case of the monster of Apple Valley, Tina Herman's manager rang police immediately when she failed to show up for work. In fact, the manager was so certain that something was wrong, she climbed through the window of Tina's home to find the house covered in blood. Now, the sickening part is that police had actually already been to the house twice, knocked, saw nothing was kind of wrong from the outside, and just left. Trust your women's intuition. If you get a gut feeling, act fast. To see exactly how these two cases played out, I've got two-parters over on my podcast, The Bourne Investigation: the Watts family tragedy and the monster of Apple Valley.
Imagine you break up with your toxic high school girlfriend and her idea of closure is by unaliving you and your friend by driving 100 miles per hour into a brick wall. That's what allegedly happened to Dominic and Davion, and the girl driving the car was Mackenzie Shrilla. She was 17 at the time, living in Ohio, and if you scroll through her TikTok before the crash, you would probably think that she was just a normal teenage girl. But ask anyone who knew her and they would say that she was an entitled mean girl. And no one knew that better than her boyfriend, Dominique. They had been dating on and off since high school, and everyone said that their relationship was a nightmare. They fought constantly, and not like little teenage drama arguments. No, she would actually hit him. And Dominique's mom said that Mackenzie was very possessive over him. I get it, my man, but there are literal recordings of this girl saying, "If you don't let me in the house, I'll key your car." That is not cute at all, girl. And just a few weeks before the crash, they were driving together. She was behind the wheel and they had gotten into one of their usual arguments. She gets so pissed off that she allegedly started swinging at him while driving. Dominique got so scared because she was swerving and losing control of the car, so he called his mom to come and pick him up. And while he's on the phone, Mackenzie screams, "I'm going to wreck this car right now." But thankfully, she calmed down and did not crash. At this point, Dominique's just trying to end it. He's over it and he knows that this relationship is toxic. But 2 weeks later, they somehow got back together. Young love can be so complicated. They go to a party with one of their friends, Davion. According to her other friends, none of them were drinking or smoking, but I find that very hard to believe because Mackenzie had a bag of mushrooms in her pocket. Anyways, when the party was over, they all hopped into Mackenzie's car. Dominic was in the passenger seat and Davion was in the back. The three of them start heading home at around 5 a.m. and at some point of the drive, something happened inside that car. We don't know exactly what. Maybe Davion said that he was done for real this time, or maybe they got into another big argument. All we know is that in a split second, Mackenzie starts driving faster. Not like speeding a little fast, no, she is fully flooring it. She takes it from 25 to 100 miles per hour on a residential road, and straight ahead was a commercial building. At the very last second, she allegedly yanked the wheel and sent the car straight into a brick wall. They hit the wall so hard, the entire car split in two. Dominic and Davion were instantly killed, but somehow Mackenzie survived. She was rushed to the hospital, got surgery, and made a full recovery. Well, she's in a wheelchair. And weeks later, this girl is partying like it never happened. She's out at these concerts and making TikToks, basically flexing that she's one of those girls that can do drugs and not die. And at the bottom, she added this caption that said, "Google Mackenzie Shrilla, Strongville, Ohio." It's like she was flexing the accident, which isn't how a normal person would act if their boyfriend was just in an accident. But maybe that's her way of coping? Meanwhile, police are trying to figure out, was this an accident or intentional? And as they're piecing it together, they start talking to her friends. Friends who said that Mackenzie has threatened to crash the car before. Friends who knew how toxic their relationship got. They find voice messages, texts, videos of her being extremely aggressive. And then investigators get access to her car's black box. It's basically an event data recorder that tracks every move the car makes. It showed that Mackenzie never once tried to brake, not even for a second, that her foot stayed on the gas the entire time, that she jerked the steering wheel at the very last second, intentionally driving straight into that brick wall. So the police immediately arrested her, and you can see the shock on her face when they told her, "You're under arrest for 2 counts of aggravated." Mackenzie swore up and down that she did not do it, that she doesn't remember anything from that night. But with all of this evidence, Mackenzie was eventually sentenced to not 1, but 2 life sentences. But even now, this case does not feel clear-cut, because after the trial, new evidence started coming out, stuff that her lawyer never used. Like these text messages, ones where Dominique is apologizing for grabbing the wheel the first time the crash almost happened. There's even one where Mackenzie texted Dominique's mom saying that he tried to spin out the car and end her life, which raises the question, was Dominique actually the one that tried to crash the car the first time? Was Mackenzie the victim here, or were they just toxic for each other? Because one of the biggest reasons they convicted her was this narrative that she had a history of being aggressive towards Dominic. But these messages contradict that, and the second thing that really sealed it for the police was the black box. It showed she never once applied the brake, which is true, but the black box tells us what happened, not why. Because what if she couldn't stop? What if something actually happened to her body in that moment? There was a neurologist who studied Mackenzie's medical records after the crash, and according to him, everything pointed to one thing. She might have blacked out or even had a seizure. He said her blood oxygen was dangerously low, her lactate levels were through the roof, she couldn't remember anything after the crash. Even her parents tried to give the court medical records. Ones they said would have proved that this was not intentional, but they were never submitted to the courts. So now it's like, what really happened, but we'll never really know, because the only person that could tell us is sitting in prison and the other two are gone.
It might just be me, but I don't think that an almost 30-year-old man has any business adding a 15-year-old girl that he doesn't even know on Facebook. But that is exactly what he did. He added a young girl, groomed her, and then lured her to his flat to her horrific death. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the murder of Kaylee Haywood. 15-year-old Kaylee was living in lovely Measham, Lincolnshire in 2015. She would be described as a typical teenage girl. She was bubbly, she was chatty, she was outgoing and confident, and she had a lovely little group of friends. The teachers at Kaylee's school would describe her as very hardworking. She was extremely bright and had a very promising future ahead of her. Like so many other teenagers, especially back then, Kaylee was an avid user of social media, and she would accept friend requests from anyone who sent one, regardless of whether she knew them or not. So when 27-year-old Luke Harlow sent her a friend request, Kaylee accepted it, thinking absolutely nothing of it. The two began to speak on Messenger before they exchanged phone numbers, and from here, they would text each other constantly. From morning till night, they were constantly messaging one another, sending hundreds of text messages. Luke would love bomb Kaylee, and he would tell her everything that she wanted to hear. He called her beautiful, perfect, gorgeous. He nicknamed her princess, and he was seemingly always there for her whenever she felt down. To Kaylee, he came across as a very nice, genuine, friendly man who really cared for Kaylee. However, unbeknownst to her, Luke was actually grooming her. When Kaylee told Luke that she was only 15, aware that he was 27, instead of Luke turning around and saying to Kaylee, "We cannot continue to talk, especially in the way that we are talking, because you are literally a minor," he instead decided to manipulate Kaylee. He told her that she could not tell anyone about their relationship or that they were talking, and that their relationship/friendship was, quote, their little secret. He warned Kaylee that if she told anyone about the two, he would get into big trouble. He would be arrested and sent to prison for a very long time, and of course Kaylee didn't want that. This was a person that she had grown close to, and so Luke had scared her into silence. On the 13th of November 2015, Luke and Kaylee would meet for the very first time. Kaylee had told her mum that she was having a sleepover at another friend's house, when in fact she was going to Luke's flat in Ibstock. The two would spend that evening together watching movies and getting drunk. The following day, Kaylee would text her mum asking if she could stop out another night, and just thinking that Kaylee was having an amazing time with one of her friends, her mum said yes. At approximately 7:30 p.m, Luke would go to the home of 29-year-old Stephen Beedman to ask if he had any spare mixer for some alcohol that he had bought. Luke then told Stephen that he, quote, had a bird over, which I think is just a horrible saying. Upon hearing this, Stephen decided to join them, and so he followed Luke back to his flat. The three all drank together for around about 4 hours straight, and the men got Kaylee so intoxicated that she was completely out of it. She didn't know where she was, what she was doing, she couldn't keep her eyes open or lift her head up, she was slurring her words, and she was just in the most vulnerable position. This is a young girl inside of a man's flat, a man that she doesn't really know, and both of them are much older than her. and no one knows that she's there. The next day, now the 15th of September, a man who was out walking would come across a smashed iPhone on the floor. He picked it up and managed to get into the phone, and in an attempt to try and return the phone to its owner, he went on the call log and rang the last person on the phone log. This went through to one of Kaylee's friends, who was very confused when she picked up the phone. It was Kaylee's name on the caller ID, but it was a strange man on the end of the phone telling her that this phone had been lost. What was even stranger was the area that this man said he found the phone in. It was in Ibstock. This friend would then contact Kaylee's mum, who would go on to report Kaylee missing to the police, and thankfully they immediately jumped into action. Investigators searched through Kaylee's phone and her laptop, and that is when they discovered the hundreds, if not thousands, of messages between herself and Luke. He was tracked down and brought in for questioning, and Luke admitted to the police that he had spent the 2 previous days with Kaylee, but he wasn't the last person to see her. The last he saw of Kaylee, she was with Stephen Beedman. When he was tracked down and brought in for questioning, he initially denied even knowing Kaylee or any involvement of being with her, up until he broke. He would confess to the police that he had raped and murdered 15-year-old Kaylee Haywood. Using a map, Stephen directed to the police where they would be able to find Kaylee, and at around 10 p.m. on the 18th of November, lay in a field in Ibstock, they would discover Kaylee's body. She was battered, bruised, and completely naked. It was clear to the police that this young girl was the victim of an absolutely heinous murder. She had been extensively bludgeoned. Her hair was full of crusted, dry, matted blood, and Kaylee also had many self-defense wounds, where she had tried to fight off or protect herself from her attacker. Her cause of death would be ruled as being from blunt force trauma. After the discovery of Kaylee's body, Stephen stopped cooperating with the police, and so because of that, we really don't know what happened in the moments leading up to the murder, the moments of the murder, and what happened immediately after. We do not know why this evil man decided to rip away this young girl's promising bright future. At Nottingham Crown Court, Luke Harlow would plead guilty to grooming and 2 counts of sexual assault. He was also found guilty of false imprisonment. For this, he received a sentence of 12 years imprisonment. Stephen Beedman would plead guilty to the rape and murder of 15-year-old Kaylee Haywood, and for this he received a sentence of life imprisonment with a minimum term of 35 years to serve. However, he wouldn't serve that long. Stephen Beedman was found dead in his cell in prison in April of 2021. He died due to cardiac arrest.
He ends the life of his pregnant wife. He wraps her body inside of a blanket, and right as he's dragging her across the floor, his 4-year-old daughter walks in, and Welcome to Serial Killers from Every State, and for Colorado, we are talking about this snake, Chris Watts, the man who erased his entire family to play house with his side chick. But first, let's back up. One day, Shannon, his wife, decides to surprise Chris with really big news. She's pregnant with their 3rd baby, a boy this time. She films his reaction on camera. The moment is supposed to be happy, and he acts happy, but he wasn't happy, not even close, because this baby was with the wrong woman, because in the back of his mind, he was already in love with someone else. Nicole Kessinger, the co-worker, the new chapter, the fantasy. It started as innocent flirting at work, but then things started getting more serious. Chris tells her he's married, but in the process of separating, and she believes him. Meanwhile, Shannon's off taking their daughters, Bella and Celeste, to a 5-week trip to North Carolina. Chris decided to stay behind alone, except he's not alone. He is sleeping at Nicole's house almost every single night. They go to the movies for their first official date, which is ironic because that's exactly what he did to Shannon too. He takes Nicole to drag races, and she takes him camping in the sand dune. This man was just out playing pretending that he was single, pretending that he was in love, and Nicole fed into that fantasy. She made him feel in control. She was very submissive, and Chris loved that, unlike Shannon, who was very dominant and handled everything. She planned the finances, raised the kids, kept the house running. She sounds like an absolute queen to me. And while Chris is off chasing butterflies with his new girlfriend, Shannon's over here writing him love letters and posting on Facebook about Father's Day, saying that he's the best dad in the world. She is trying so hard to fix something that she doesn't know is already broken, and it's driving her crazy. She texted a friend saying, "He hasn't touched or kissed me all week, and I think something's wrong, but I don't think he's cheating. He doesn't have it in him." That just hurts thinking about all of the emotional pain she was going through, because not only did he cheat, but he also unalived her and their kids. At some point, Chris flies to North Carolina to join Shannon and the girls, but before he leaves, he gives Nicole a love letter. And while he's gone, Nicole was on Google for over 2 hours looking at wedding dresses because she thought this was real. She really thought they were gonna get married. And while Shannon, his wife, is over here begging him for the tiniest amount of affection, Nicole is over here sending him half-naked pictures that he's hiding in a fake calculator app. It's sickening. That's what it is. When they all got back to Colorado, Shannon had actually left again for a really quick work trip in Arizona. She trusted him to watch the kids. And what does he do? This man hired a babysitter just so he could take Nicole out to a sports bar while Shannon is gone. And just 2 days later, she comes back home completely unaware of what he just did. It's late, almost 2 a.m. The doorbell catches her rolling up her suitcase to the front door. She tiptoes inside, trying not to wake the kids up. She gets in bed next to Chris, and they have... I honestly think that was like her final attempt to connect with him. And the next morning, he wakes her up, looks her dead in the face, and says, "I don't love you anymore." Just like that. And then he just admits that he's been seeing someone, and Shannon is over here in shock. She allegedly says, "You're never gonna see the kids again," and that's when Chris claimed that he snapped and just blacked out. In a fit of rage, he climbs on top of her, literally sitting on her stomach, and then he takes his hands and wraps it around her neck. She doesn't scream, she doesn't fight, she just stares at him as he continues to her. For about 3 minutes, he kept on squeezing her neck until her body went limp. And then he wraps her in a bedsheet and starts dragging her body across the house. But that's when Bella walks in. She sees her mother on the floor with her eyes closed, not moving, and she says, "Oh my god, I can't." Okay, she says, "Daddy, what are you doing to mommy?" And Chris lies, saying, "Mommy's sick right now and we're gonna take her to the hospital." He then loads her body into the backseat of his work truck. Then he buckles Bella and Celeste in right next to her and drives 45 minutes to a remote oil field. But what happens next is beyond horrific. First, he takes Celeste, only 3 years old, out of the truck and smothers her with his bare hands right in front of her sister Bella. And when he goes back to the truck, Bella asks him, "Is the same thing you did to Cece gonna happen to me?" And as she screams her last words, "Daddy, no," he does it anyway. Evil doesn't describe it truly. He then shoves each of their little bodies into separate oil tanks, this small by the way, and buries Shannon's pregnant body into a shallow makeshift grave nearby. He didn't even leave them together. When he drives home, he texted Shannon's phone as if she was still alive, creating an alibi, pretending like he's worried. But by that afternoon, Shannon's friend started getting a very weird feeling. She hadn't heard from Shannon all day, which wasn't like her, so she knew something was wrong. She calls the police. They get to the house, and when Chris gets called from work, he acts so shocked. He starts fake crying, telling officers he has no idea where Shannon went. But when they check the neighbor's surveillance footage and see him backing his truck up at 5 a.m. to load something strange, Chris starts panicking. You can see it on the body cam. This man is pacing back and forth with his hands on his head. And as soon as he leaves the house, the neighbor turns to the officer and he's like, "Yeah, he's not acting right. He never loads stuff into his truck that way." 2 days later, police bring him in for a polygraph test and he fails miserably. Investigators basically told him, "My guy, we know that you know where your family is, so just fess up so we can get this over with." And Chris eventually breaks and asks to speak to his dad. That's when he finally admits it. Well, not the truth, but a twisted version. He said that Shannon ended the lives of the kids, so he ended hers out of rage. It's a lie, but it's enough to get the ball rolling. He finally got arrested, and after 2 weeks of playing victim, he finally confessed and admitted that he was the one who ended all 3 of them. Chris Watts was sent to prison with 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole. 2 of them for his children who never got the chance to grow up. 2 for the woman who only ever wanted love, and 1 for the baby that she carried for them, Nico. All because he wanted to chase a fantasy with another woman. That's Chris Watts. By definition, he is not a serial killer, but to me, that is Colorado's most cold-blooded killers. It's always better to have your guard up than not. I love you guys. Please be safe out there. Mwah. Group hug.
This 18-year-old boy died from sepsis after pine needles, twigs, and moss were found inside a wound on his arm that a doctor had stitched up. And the family has now filed a lawsuit against the hospital and the physicians who took care of him. This is so sad. So Ethan Cantrell had graduated high school, and then about a month after that, he got engaged to his long-term girlfriend. And then around a month after that, he was gone. He's a 5th-generation logger, and on August 15th of 2024, he was cutting some wood when his right arm got punctured. Afterwards, he went to Good Samaritan Regional Medical Center in Corvallis, Oregon. While there, the doctor flushed out the wound, did an x-ray that just showed soft tissue air, didn't show any kind of debris or anything, stitched him back up, and then discharged him home with a 7-day course of oral antibiotics. But within hours, his arm was even more swollen. He had developed a fever of around 102. He was having headaches. So his mom called the hospital and they apparently advised her that he was already on antibiotics, he would be fine, and said that he might have COVID. But they basically told her not to worry. But by the next day, he was struggling to breathe, so back to the ER they went. And he was allegedly examined by the same doctor who had seen him the day before. The doctor diagnosed him with a deep tissue injury, but didn't give him any other antibiotics or really do much of anything. But within another few hours, his arm had grown to be 3 times its normal size and it started seeping out fluid. So at that point, a different physician decided to open up his wound and they found pine needles, twigs, moss, and other plant matter that had been stitched inside. And if you're wondering why those things didn't show up on the x-ray that he had done when he first went into the ER, it's because stuff like that typically doesn't show up. But obviously that first doctor didn't properly clean the wound. And by that point, he had a massive bacterial infection and he was completely septic. Good Samaritan transferred him over to Oregon Health and Science University, where they amputated his arm all the way up to his shoulder in a last-ditch attempt to save his life, but it was too late. Ethan passed away on August 20th, 2024, which is just 5 days after his arm was punctured. The lawsuit asked for $100 million in damages, and I hope they get every last penny. Ethan had fallen on some wood, and if they had cleaned it out properly before closing it back up, he would still be here.
Before we get into today's story, I've been meaning to ask you guys, I'm thinking about doing a day in the life because you guys always ask me how the research behind the scenes goes. So let me know if you want to see that because today I'm filming 5 videos. One thing that is constant is when I film multiple videos in a row, I have to have a drink. My throat gets unbelievably dry when I film so many videos in a row, and this has been my drink of choice lately. Anyway, let's get into it. 23-year-old Kata Scott was a Penn State grad and a healthcare worker in Philadelphia. She worked at the Terrace at Chestnut Hill, an assisted living facility, and at times, Kata would work the overnight shift. She was born and raised in Philadelphia, and she loved it there, mostly because her family was there. Kata was such a down-to-earth, family-oriented, passionate person, and anyone who had the pleasure of knowing her would tell you so. The night of October 4th, 2025 was a Friday, and that night, Kata had been scheduled to work an overnight shift at the assisted living facility. She said bye and goodnight to her family, and she drove herself to work. When Kata walked out of her front door that Friday night, it marked that night as the last time that her family would ever see her alive again. She arrived at work around 10 p.m. She clocked in, she said hi, and from the jump, her coworkers that knew her could tell that something was bothering her. And something was, because in the days leading up to her disappearance, Kata had been dealing with unknown caller and unknown texters texting her with clear intentions to bother her and or get a reaction out of her. And she was over it. She had confided in family and friends, and those closest to her knew just how much this had been getting underneath her skin. And that night, as soon as she got to work, the phone calls and the text messages started to roll in. A coworker of Kata's overheard her answering the phone and say something along the lines of, "I can't believe that you're calling me about this." And then she just saw her walk outside, presumably to take the phone call outside or just to get some fresh air. But once Kata walked out, she never walked back in. And within minutes of arriving at her job, it felt like 23-year-old Kata had just vanished into thin air. The following morning, immediately, her family members noticed that Kata had not returned home. And after poking around, they also realized that her car was still parked at her place of work and that her phone had been turned off. Of course, as soon as it became apparent that nobody had heard of Kata, that nobody knew where she was, panic started to set in for those closest to her. The entire situation just felt so odd, so weird, so scary, and really, the only thing that stood out as far as who could have been connected to her disappearance were those strange phone calls. Authorities learned that Kata had been receiving weird messages from phone numbers that she did not recognize. And after taking a look at her phone, it wasn't long before investigators were able to identify the person that Kata had been speaking to that night when she walked outside of her work building only to never return. Kata's cell phone data led authorities to a 21-year-old man called Keon King, and authorities didn't only believe that he was a person who had been in communication with Kata in the days leading up to her disappearance, but they also had reason to believe that he was the last person to have seen her that night. Keon's phone number appeared repeatedly in Kata's cell phone records, the text messages between them starting on October 2nd, just 2 days before her disappearance. In that first exchange, Keon texted Kata, "Yo Kata, this is my new number," to which Kata responded to by saying, "Who this?" Keon's response to that was Kel. That was it, until the following message that came on October 4th, the day that she disappeared. And remember, she had shown up to work to her shift around 10 p.m. Between 9:25 and 10:12, Keon was repeatedly calling her phone over and over and over again, 12 times to be exact. Then at 10:07 p.m., Kata texted Keon saying, "Kidnap me again." He responded, "Better be up too," to which she responded to by saying, "Call when you're here." 6 minutes later at 10:15 p.m., the cell phone data showed Kata outside of her place of work in the parking lot. And Keon King's phone also
also tracked to that same location. So authorities suspected that the two of them had met up then, and that was only confirmed when they received CCTV footage and saw footage of Kata walking towards the parking lot and towards a 2008 black Hyundai Accent. That vehicle had been reported missing just the night before. So they meet up in the parking lot, and at 10:24 p.m., Kata Scott's phone goes offline completely. Now that detectives had identified Keon as the last person who was in contact with Kata, they began tracking his cell phone location history, and the cell phone ping towers very quickly were starting to paint a very dark picture. His cell phone was all over in different locations in connection to Kata's disappearance. Then it left the assisted living facility, and data on his phone showed him traveling to a recreational center near an abandoned middle school in Germantown, a place called Aubrey Recreation Center. At 10:28 p.m., just 4 minutes after Kata's phone went offline completely, that 2008 Hyundai Accent then parks at Aubrey Recreation Center, and the vehicle remains there for 2 whole days. Additional CCTV footage recovered from the area then showed that the day after Kata disappeared, Keon King, along with 2 others, had been at the Aubrey Recreation Center with the Hyundai Accent. They were seen on camera dragging a bag that appeared to be very heavy, almost as if there was a body inside of the bag, and then abandoning the car. Keon King also returned to that abandoned middle school multiple times in the days following Kata's disappearance. But when he was there with the 2 other men, that Hyundai wasn't the only car there. There was also a 1999 gold Toyota Camry, which was the car that the 3 men drove away in. And what do you know? That Camry was registered to Keon King. By October 9th, investigators believed that they had more than enough evidence to make a move. They secured a search warrant to look through Keon's house, and what they found only made him look worse. The search of the house turned up contractor bags, a hammer, latex gloves, and among other items. On top of that, while a group of investigators was working on that, another group was looking into Keon King, looking into his background and looking into who he really was, and his background was not painting a pretty picture. Back in January of 2025, just 5 months before Kata disappeared, Keon had been accused of kidnapping and a woman. Allegedly, Keon had kidnapped this woman in front of her house, threw her in a car, and then eventually let her out of the car. However, those charges were dropped after the victim, who survived the encounter, failed to appear in court. But point being that Keon King was the kind of guy who would be capable of kidnapping a woman. He had done this before, and he would do it again. By October 14th, investigators had built their case. They strongly believed that Keon knew way more than he was letting on. But before they could arrest him, guess what? Keon King strolls into the police station on his own, willingly. He turned himself into the police on October 14th, 10 days after Kata disappeared. He was charged with kidnapping, false imprisonment, stalking, and tampering with evidence. So he turns himself in, but by that point, Kata Scott was still missing. And Keon was not willing to talk, which is interesting because he turned himself in, yet he didn't want to talk about what he did or did not do. Kata disappeared the night of October 4th. On October 15th, authorities received a tip, leading them back to the area of that abandoned middle school and the Aubrey Recreation Center. And even though they had searched the area before, this time around they found physical proof that Kata had been there. In the area, they found her debit card, her glasses, her ID, and her phone case. Kata's belongings, but no Kata. It wasn't until the 18th of October that authorities would find a body, and all hope of Kata returning home safely would be lost. On October 18th, an anonymous tip came into the police tip line. It was again in regards to that area by the abandoned middle school. First Deputy John Stanford said, quote, "The tip was very specific. That led us back to this location here," end quote. The caller had called in pretty much to say, "She is there, go back, look again." And when they did, authorities went back there again, this time with drones, K9 units, and crime scene teams. They found a shallow grave. It had been dug near the woods behind the building, and in the shallow grave, human remains. The body was taken for an autopsy that Saturday. On Monday, at a press conference, authorities confirmed that the body was that of 23-year-old Kata Scott. Police believe that she had lost her life only 20 to 30 minutes after she disappeared. Kata's family members were heartbroken. Of course they were. There's nothing that prepares you to, one, lose someone, let alone lose someone in such a horrific, traumatizing way. Following the discovery of her body, a representative from the DA's office made a statement on behalf of Kata's family, quote, "The family asked to keep them in their prayers. They said they are profoundly thankful to every person who shared Kata's story, joined the search efforts, prayed with us, and stood by the family during this devastating time. Your compassion, love, and strength has carried us when we could not carry ourselves," end quote. When the autopsy results came back, it was revealed that Kata passed away from a single wound to the head. That prompted authorities to add additional charges against 21-year-old Keon King, and yet what really happened to Kata remains a mystery. This case remains an ongoing case, and unfortunately a lot of questions are still unanswered, but hopefully when the trial begins, Kata's family is able to get some sort of justice and some sort of closure. As of today, Keon King remains in custody with a $2.5 million bail. The actual trial date has not been yet set. The last update I have is that apparently Keon King is expected to plead not guilty, and then after that his trial will be set, so we'll have to see. Horrible case and so many questions. That is all from me today. Thank you for spending time with me today and for listening to Kata's story. Hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.
He SA'd and unalived her, and then stuffed and twisted her body into a toilet bowl. 7-year-old Sharice Iverson was left unsupervised at the casino arcade while her father was gambling. Security guards repeatedly reminded Sharice's father that it wasn't safe to leave Sharice unsupervised. Her father did not care and just continued gambling. Sharice ran into 18-year-old Jeremy Stronmeyer and playfully threw wet napkins and a "Caution wet floor" sign at him. Jeremy did not like that, so he followed Sharice into the women's bathroom and then lured her into the handicap stall. Jeremy took all of Sharice's clothes off and then started to SA her while covering her mouth with his hand to muffle her screams. Jeremy's friend Cash told Jeremy to stop, but when he didn't stop, Cash just left the bathroom and let Jeremy continue to SA Sharice. Jeremy strangled Sharice and then twisted her neck to make sure that he had unalived her. Jeremy then proceeded to stuff Sharice's body into a toilet bowl. A security officer found Sharice's body and then alerted Sharice's father. Jeremy told Cash that he had unalived Sharice, and then the two boys just went about their night like nothing ever happened, just like normal. Jeremy was sentenced to 4 consecutive life sentences. Surprisingly, Cash was never sentenced or punished and peacefully graduated from UC Berkeley, which left the public outraged. But what do you guys think about this case?
This is the story of Melinda Loveless. Shanda Sher was born on June 6, 1979 in Pineville, Kentucky. Her parents got a divorce when she was very young, but her mother ended up remarrying. But in 1991, her mother got divorced again. This caused the two to move to New Albany, Indiana, so Shanda can be closer to her father. It was there where she enrolled in Hazelwood Middle School. Now, 12-year-old Shanda was finding it hard to make friends at this middle school, probably because this was the biggest middle school she had ever attended. Shanda was a very smart girl, very active 12-year-old. She played all type of different sports. Academically, her grades were up there. She thought being 12 was holding her back. Her mother said in an interview that Shanda wished that she was 13 so bad just so she could say that she was a teenager. But one day she was walking through the hallway of Hazelwood where she encountered a 14-year-old bully named Amanda Heffron. Amanda pushed Shanda down to the ground, but Shanda surprised Amanda because she was not no punk. She got up and threw them hands with Amanda, and that landed them both in detention. Now, while in detention, the two started laughing about the fight they just had, and the laughing led to conversing, and these two eventually ended up being friends. But Amanda was liking Shanda a little more than Shanda was thinking. As the two are getting closer and hanging out more, Amanda will write Shanda letters asking her, "Do you like girls? Do you think I'm cute?" And Shanda honestly didn't know what to think. I think she was just happy that she had made a friend. In October of 1991, Amanda asked Shanda to the school dance, and Shanda said yes. Now, it was at this dance where Shanda met 16-year-old Melinda Loveless, who is Amanda's ex-girlfriend. 16 in middle school, is that too old, or am I tripping? Anyways, when Melinda sees Shanda and Amanda at the dance together, she loses her mind. An altercation immediately broke out. Amanda is trying to break it up, but low key, she's liking that these two girls are fighting over her. After the fight, Melinda was heard saying that she was going to kill Shanda. She went as far as writing Amanda a letter saying, I'm going to kill your new little girlfriend. Shanda's mother got wind of this relationship slash friendship with Amanda, and her mother contacted Amanda's parents and said, tell your daughter to leave my daughter the hell alone. But Amanda was obsessed with Shanda. She did not stop. Shanda's mother felt like ever since she started hanging with Amanda, she was getting in trouble in school, her grades were slipping, and Shanda's mother found a letter confirming that her and Amanda had been sexually active. This is when Shanda's mother removed her from Hazelwood Middle School. She enrolled Shanda in a Catholic school in November of 91. But even with Shanda gone, Melinda is still not over her taking her girlfriend. Over the course of 2 months, Melinda is still writing Amanda letters saying how she's going to kill Shanda, how she hates Shanda. Mind you, Shanda been gone. But Melinda is pissed that Shanda still has Amanda mind gone. So on January 10th of 1992, Melinda decided to pay Shanda a visit. She called up her friend Lori Tuckett. Now, Lori Tuckett is a 17-year-old dropout. Lori and her friends Tony and Hope were going to a concert that night, but Melinda is like, before we attend this concert, or before y'all attend this concert, we're going to kill a little girl tonight. Hope is 15 years old. She is Lori's friend. Tony is also 15 years old. She's Hope's friend. So Tony and Lori don't really know each other like that, only through Hope. But Tony and Hope don't know Melinda at all. They're literally just meeting her this night. Lori went to pick up Hope first, and she told her about the plan to kill Shanda. And then the two went to go pick up Tony. And Lori told Hope, hey, tell Tony about the plan. And all three girls was in agreement. They picked up Melinda last. And when Melinda got in the car, she had the knife ready. Now, Melinda initially said that she just wanted to scare Shanda because she took her girlfriend. But around 8 p.m., the girls landed in Jeffersonville, where Shanda was staying with her dad for the weekend. And Tony and Hope went up and knocked on the door. Mind you, Shanda don't even know these two. Ain't seen them before a day in her life. So she like, who the hell are y'all? But they told her that Amanda really wanted to see and talk to her back at the witch's castle, which was an abandoned building near the Ohio River. Shanda told the girls to come back around 12 a.m. when her father and her stepmother is asleep, and that's what they did. When Shanda got in the car, Melinda, who was in the back hiding under a blanket, rose up and put a knife to Shanda's throat, and the group took her to the witch's castle. Once they got there, they taunted Shanda, saying that it was dead bodies in this building and she was going to be one of them. They started lighting things on fire, saying that she's going to be next. But the group got scared that if they lit a fire, that it would grab somebody's attention. So they forced Shanda back into the car and took her to another abandoned building. It was here where Melinda and Lori forced Shanda to strip down to her underwear. The two then started to beat and torture Shanda. Melinda was kicking Shanda in the face so hard to the point where Shanda's braces tore her lip and her tongue. Tony and Hope stayed in the car because they felt that things were getting too out of hand. But Hope decided to get out the car and started to help Melinda and Lori. She held Shanda down while Melinda and Lori started stabbing her in her chest, her abdomen, and in her legs. Lori then strangled Shanda with a piece of rope, thinking that she finished her off. The group then put her in the trunk of the car, and they were all going to head back to Lori's house. On their way to Lori's house, Shanda started screaming and banging on the trunk. Lori pulled over and stabbed her a few more times. When the group made it back to Lori's house, they decided to clean themselves up, have a drink. At around 2:30 a.m., Lori and Melinda decided to go for a joyride with Shanda still in the trunk. As these two are joyriding, they hear Shanda yet again. She was still alive. Lori pulled over again, but this time she beat Shanda with a tire iron until she felt her skull cave in. She then asked Melinda to smell it. The girls made their way back to Lori's house to tell Tony and Hope what had happened. They even asked the two, did they want to see Shanda's body? And Tony said, hell no. But Hope agreed. She not only wanted to see it, she sprayed Windex on Shanda's wound and said, you're not so hot now, are you? The girls got in the car and drove to a gas station where they purchased 2 liters of Pepsi. They poured the Pepsi out and filled it with gasoline. They then took Shanda to an empty field near Lemon Road. They had dumped her body there, and Hope poured gasoline on her, and Lori lit a match. The group then got back in the car to drive away, but Melinda was having fear that the fire would not burn like she would want it to. So she made them do a U-turn, and she went and poured more gasoline on Shanda and lit her on fire again. After, the group went to breakfast at McDonald's and joking that the charred sausage looked like Shanda's face. And then Melinda pulled up on Amanda, telling her that she had killed Shanda. And Amanda didn't believe her at first until she seen a bloody sock and something else of Shanda's. On January 11th at around 11 a.m., 2 hunters discovered Shanda's body. They initially thought that she was a mannequin. When the police saw her body, they thought that it was a drug or a gang-related attack because of how severe it was. But they didn't have to go searching for the killers, because that same evening, Tony and her parents walked into the police station and made a full confession. All 4 girls were charged as adults, and everybody pled guilty. Hope Rippey, who was 15 at the time of the crime, was sentenced to 60 years. She appealed and it got reduced to 35 years. She only served 14 years. She was released in April of 2002. Tony Lawrence, who was also 15 at the time of the crime, was sentenced to 20 years, but she only served 9. She was released in December of 2000. Lori Luckett, who was considered one of the ringleaders, was 17 at the time of the crime. She was sentenced to 60 years, but she only served 25 years. She was released in January of 2018. And the ringleader, Melinda Lovelace, who was 16 at the time of the crime, she also was sentenced to 60 years, but she only served 26 years. She was released September of 2019. All I gotta say about all this is Shanda was 12. She was 12 years old. You big grown bitches. Shanda was 12. A 12-year-old made y'all feel like that. And then I just feel like everybody keep talking about their upbringing. Oh, they all had a bad upbringing. I don't want to hear none of that shit. That's why every single one of y'all look a mess now. Even Amanda. This is the story of Natasha Bates. Bradley County, Tennessee, June 28th, 2012. 27-year-old Natasha, who was also known as Tasha, found her 2 sons, Leland and River, who was 3 and 5 years old, unresponsive in the front yard. She couldn't find her phone to call 911, so she put the boys in her car and drove them to her father's house, who lived like a mile away. Once she got to her father's house, she told him to dial 911. And whoever was at the father's house, they decided to take the boys out of the car and take them into the house as they dialed the police. During the 911 call, Tasha's father is frantically saying how one of the boys is turning purple. Even his nail beds were discolored. When EMT arrived, they said that the boys were soaking wet from sweat. 3-year-old River died shortly after arriving to Sky Ridge Medical Center. 5-year-old Leland was airlifted to a children's hospital in Chattanooga, Tennessee. He ended up passing the following day. Both of their temperatures were at 106 and 109. The cause of death was hypothermia. It was said that Leland's temperature was still in the hundreds after they had put him on ice. But what happened? During questioning, Tasha told the detectives that Her and the boys woke up that morning. She cooked them eggs for breakfast and they went out and played for the rest of the day. Now, she had something called a slip and slide in her yard, and she said the boys were playing on that. Now, slip and slides require water. So she was saying that that wasn't sweat, that was water that was on the boys. She said she was cleaning her house and she would look out the window to check on the boys periodically. And she said it was about 45 minutes to where she didn't check on them at all. And that's when everything transpired. But even with the temperature getting up to 101 on June 28th, it still doesn't explain why those boys' bodies were as hot as they were. This is when Tasha changed her story. She then said she found her boys in her car after not checking on them for 45 minutes. She said her youngest was in the front seat with the seat leaned all the way back, and her oldest one was hanging out of the back door. This is when the police decided to seize her car. They found her cell phone in the trunk. What was it doing there? And almost all of her door handles were broken. The driver front was missing on the outside, broken on the inside, so you couldn't open it from the inside. The passenger front, either missing or broken, you couldn't open it from the inside. The back passenger was broken. You couldn't open that from the inside. The only fully functional door was the driver backside. Due to the nature of this crime, Tasha had to do a drug test and she tested positive for meth. She was not immediately arrested. About a week after the boy's death, the police decided to do an experiment with Tasha's car. They put her car in the exact same spot that she normally parks. And even though the temperatures didn't get up to 101 like it did on June 28th, the inside of the car still rose to 129 degrees by 1 p.m., which means them babies had to been in that car for way longer than 45 minutes. When they checked her property, the slip and slide that she said her sons were playing on was completely dry. It looked like it ain't had no water on it in I don't know how long. They also found products in her garage that are used to distribute meth. Now, she told the detectives that she only smokes meth once a month and she smokes weed on a regular. Nobody believed that because she also said that she cooked those kids eggs on the morning of June 28th, but their autopsy report said different. They had no food in their stomachs. Tasha Bates was arrested on July 18th, 2012. She was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of aggravated child neglect, and multiple methamphetamine charges. Her trial started in August 2013, and here is what I pieced together with this. It was a witness named Mike. Mike said he went on a date with Tasha the night before, June 27th. Their day started at 5:30 p.m. and it ended around 10 p.m. Tasha had her children with her. They were in the car while her and Mike did their activities on their dates. Now, after their date, Tasha went home and there was a guy named Preston there. Now, Preston said that he was at Tasha's house playing darts, which was probably a lie. They was probably in there distributing and smoking meth, but that's neither here nor there. She took Preston home at around 1:30 a.m. and Preston said that the boys were in the car when Tasha took him home. By the time of her trial, Tasha had changed her story back to she found the boys laying in the yard, but that just was not true with their temperature being so high. They said that car got up to 140 degrees on the inside on the day of June 28th that reached 101 degrees just period that day. On August 29th, 2013, she was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms. So Tasha will not be getting out of jail, but it's still unclear of what happened. Me personally, I think she was smoking meth with Mike, and they was out doing whatever. Then she got home and was smoking more meth. Now, I don't know what happened. I don't know if she left those kids in the car overnight or the kids got stuck in the car. That part, I don't know. But I just think Tasha was so high, she fell asleep and woke up to her kids unresponsive. What do y'all think, Yellow Tape? This case, it's not a lot on this case, but it blew my mind because it's still unclear of what happened. She kept lying. And then I don't trust the guys she was with either because they was addicts as well. So what do y'all think about this?
This has to be the worst case of child SA that I have ever read about, to the point where it's so hard to find details about what actually happened online because it's that bad. Huge trigger warning. We're talking about children and SA. So if you think that listening to this is going to harm your mental health in any way, please skip this video. And guys, I cannot express enough how much I mean it. Like, your mental health is #1 priority. So please take care of yourselves. But this is not going to be an easy one to listen to. In this case, there are 5 generations of family members all having kids with one another. We're going to Nova Scotia today in Canada, specifically an area called South Mountain. Very quiet, very remote, very isolated. That is where William Goler was born to his parents, Stella and Charles. He was one of 8 children, so the Goler family was a family of 10. Additionally, there were also grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, you name it. And all of those extended family members also lived in that same house. So it was a full house, to say the least. And the Golers were known as, quote, mountain folk. The house they lived in was away from everyone and everything, aka the perfect place to go if you want to commit a crime and hide whatever it is that you're doing. It was also incredibly filthy and dirty as a result of 1, not having any money, 2, having so many people in there, and 3, just a lack of cleaning. The land surrounding the house was completely unkept. Trash was everywhere, inside and out. The furniture was stinky and stained. There was no toilet, only a hole in the ground, no shower. No one ever cleaned up after themselves. It was moist in there, like when you walked in, the air felt wet, full of bugs all the time. It just was not a pleasant house to live in, I imagine. On top of that, they lived in poverty, so finances were pretty much non-existent. The family would go out looking for berries to pick and eat. They would try to find food from farms nearby to find something to eat. Sometimes they would go fishing. They were barely getting by. And the children were the ones that were forced to do everything: hard labor, cooking, emptying the hole, which was the toilet. They did all of the chores. They were also severely neglected. I mean, the adults didn't even take care of themselves, let alone the children. No love or attention was ever shown inside of that household whatsoever. The children probably didn't even understand the concept of love because they were never shown it. And also, from a very young age, they were told that they were to engage in intimate activities with their family members, with their own siblings and mothers and fathers. The Goler family had a history of reproducing with one another. I think it started in the 1860s, and today's story takes place in the 1970s/80s. So this had been going on in the family for well over 100 years. But at some point, all those years ago, a man had a baby with his sister, and it just started a snowball effect. That's the way that the Goler family would continue to grow, with brothers and sisters having babies together. And because of that, many of the Golers were born with disabilities, both mental and physical. If you didn't know, when relatives have children with each other, their DNA overlaps, obviously, and that overlap makes the chances of recessive genes for various defects and disorders greater by a lot. So with every new generation, the Goler family's children were born with even more severe mental and physical disabilities, and it just kept getting worse. And those disabilities affected them a lot, to the point that William was not even able to make it past the 5th grade because he just couldn't, and a lot of his siblings could not either. However, you will notice throughout the course of this video that William, even though he was considered to be uneducated, he was sharper and more advanced mentally than his siblings. And he knew that, and he took advantage of that. William also had anger issues. He had a really bad temper. Anything could make him angry or frustrated, and when he was upset, everyone around him would know. He was kind of unhinged. And what once started off as a choice to grow their family within their family, to have babies with each other, it somehow ended up becoming a strict rule. So at the time of this story, it was expected that all of the children would grow up only to have their own children with either Their mom, dad, grandpa, sibling, cousins, aunt, uncle, like nothing was off the table. Leaving the family also was not an option. When William was 24 years old in 1969, he married a 16-year-old girl named Hazel. She actually was not a direct family member of his, but she was 16 years old. She was a child, and she was forced not only by the adults in her family, but also from William's family, forced into this marriage and also forced to start having children almost immediately after. So they get married. They have 3 children. William is now a husband and a father, and there's this sort of dynamic switch within the household. William becomes the leader, for a lack of a better word. Suddenly his parents, his siblings, his extended family members all start looking at William as the new person in charge, all start looking at him as the head of the family. Whatever he said, they did, and he loved that. He made most of the decisions in his family. For one, he decided that all of the adults should go out and get a job and then hand over their paychecks to him. He was also now fully in charge of telling the kids what to do, even if they were not his kids. He would boss around everyone in the house and decide what exact role everyone was to play inside of the household. He also dictated on who people in the Goller family could or could not be friends with. He ran a tight ship, okay? And he was the toughest on his own 3 kids. And this is kind of the part where we start talking about the severe punishments that went on inside of that household. So another warning, we're talking about kids. The punishments against the kids that happened in the household from the adults, mostly from the men, they were awful. And there was a punishment for everything, because even though the house was quite literally falling apart, William would still order the children around to move trash, carry furniture from one place to another, chop wood, whatever it was. If William told you to do something and you didn't do it, you would be in serious trouble. Even things such as William deciding which kids would get to go to school and which kids wouldn't, he set the weirdest rules in place just because he could. And when his rules would be broken, he would gather up all the adult men in the house, which were 15 adult men, to punish and hurt the kids, not only psychologically, physically, but also. And he would target the children from the time that they were toddlers just because he could, because they were the most vulnerable and they could not defend themselves. Some of the punishments included being thrown down the stairs, being shoved into small places that they could not fit into, being forced in there and forced to stay there for hours. Different hard objects such as wooden panels being used on them until they were black and blue. They would use fear, isolation, and threats to keep them scared from the outside world so they wouldn't leave. And then there was a dog. William had a dog that he specifically trained to bite people, and when the kids misbehaved, he would release the dog and order it to go and bite the child. But probably worst of all, like I mentioned, was the SA, and there was a lot of intimate relations going on between family members. But when it came to the adults, they chose to do it most of the time, but when it came to the kids, they had no say. They were forced to do it whether they wanted to or not, and oftentimes this would result in pregnancy. William essayed his own daughter for the first time when she was only 5 years old, and then it turned into at least a weekly basis. William also essayed children in the family that were not his own, so his nieces and nephews. William's other daughters also experienced essay from a very, very young age, not only from their own father, but also from every other male adult in the house. One of the victims later said that William would allow anyone to essay his own kids, and said that the kids would be forced to line up against the wall, and the adults would come in and pick out which one they wanted to essay. They would choose one or multiple, whatever they wanted. William would also let strangers come into the house and pick a child that they wanted to essay. And then they would, and oftentimes the children would be forced to watch. And as another form of punishment, sometimes the adults would force the children to do it to each other. It was the worst thing that you could possibly imagine. At times, there were more than 2 people involved in the act. The adult women, by the way, were more oftentimes than not the ones that were holding the kids down when they were resisting. In one of the bedrooms, there were 4 girls that shared that bedroom, and in the middle of the night when they would hear William walking up the stairs, they knew that he was coming for one of them. One of those 4 girls later said that she learned how to fake sleeping, slow down her breathing, and she learned how to fake snore, just hoping and praying that William would pick someone else instead of her. It was so bad that some of the injuries included tearing from both the front and the back. Sometimes the kids would even have trouble walking the next day because they would be in so much pain. One of the men inside the house got his 15-year-old daughter pregnant. A grandfather got his granddaughter pregnant. Every single child in that house, boys, girls, they were all subjected to SA weekly, if not daily. Nothing was off limits. It was inhumane. So that gives you a very, very small idea of the kind of punishments that the children were subjected to. But William also had rewards. The kids would have to do things to earn a reward, but the reward was that you would get an entire day off from being essayed. That was the reward that William had to offer. You literally cannot make this up. When William was in his 30s, his wife Hazel had to go away and be at the hospital for a little while. In the meantime, he found himself a new girlfriend who was pretty much the girl version of him, Wanda. She's terrible, maybe even worse than him, but they were fully together. So Hazel ends up recovering in hospital and she comes back to the house, but William refuses to get rid of his girlfriend Wanda, and he tells Hazel that he should be allowed to have both, a wife and a girlfriend. Hazel was not happy about this, but she didn't know what to do. So for a while, William, Hazel, and Wanda all shared a bed together, and both women were not happy about it. So the situation was messy. They were constantly fighting and their fights would get ugly. That went on for a while until Hazel eventually was like, I can't do this anymore. This is too much. And she left. She moved out, leaving her and William's 3 children behind. Wanda, William's girlfriend, like I said, was pretty much the girl version of him, but you could argue that she was worse. She would participate in punishments and in the essay just as much as William on the children who were as young as 3 years old, using not only her own hands, but also objects. And it got to the point that she became the main adult that the children were scared of, which says a lot because we know how terrible William was. And Wanda was the worst to William's daughters. Sandra was one of William's daughters. She was struggling a lot mentally. Her mental health was in such a dark place from everything that she was being put through, and she started to feel like she would be better off just not being here at all. She ran away twice. Both times she ran away to go get help from adults in the outside world, telling them what was going on at home, but both times authorities did not believe her. And all they did was put her in the back of a cop car and drove her right back home, straight back to that house. I cannot imagine how defeating and soul-crushing that must have felt for her. And of course, when she got back home, she was punished for running away severely. But now we get to 1984, where finally, luckily, 14-year-old Sandra Goller would confide in someone from her school who would thankfully believe her. On January 21st of 1984, Sandra got in trouble at school for not paying attention. As a result, she was made to go stand out in the hallway. When she was alone in the hallway, she burst into tears because suddenly all of the emotions that she had been trying her best to hold in, it just became too much. She broke down. One of the teachers walking in the hallway noticed that she was crying. She approached her and asked her what was wrong, and Sandra just responded with, quote, "My father has been using me as a wife," end quote. Then she told that teacher everything, and that teacher was absolutely horrified at what she was hearing, because any normal person would be. The teacher told Sandra that she believed her, that she would be okay, and that she would help her, and that she would not let her be sent back to that house of horrors. A social worker was then called into the school, and Sandra then described in details the years of essay that her and all of the other children in the Goller house had been subjected to at the hands of the adults. She told the social worker that it happened every other day and that her father was one of the main adults who did it and encouraged it. That social worker and the teacher then called the police, who interviewed Sandra even more, which I know is necessary, and I'm so glad that so many adults wanted to listen to her and believed her and wanted to help her, but I just feel, I can't help but feel so sorry for her that she had to sit there and describe in detail the worst things that have ever happened to her over and over and over again. But I'm just glad that they finally listened. By the end of the day, authorities put Sandra in the care of CPS because they were not going to make her go back to the house. So she didn't go home that night, and William just assumed that she ran away again. Police officers, though, didn't want to rush immediately over to the house because the Goller family, many of the adults were known to have anger issues. They were also really big hunters, meaning that they had a lot of weapons at their house. So they decided that a safer way to do it would be to wait until the next day, wait until more of the Goller children were at school, and then pull them to class and remove them that way. The following day, authorities pulled the kids from class to interview them as well. And at first, they didn't want to talk because they were so scared of William and Wanda. But eventually, after some time, they talked. They confessed everything again, confirming everything that Sandra had said and confirming that they too were victims of SA at the hands of William, Wanda, their own brothers, fathers, uncles, and sisters, brother, cousins, etc. Once they had most of the children safe, officers headed to the house. They knocked on the door. William answered, and he invited them inside. And officers were shocked yet again, this time at just how filthy and disgusting and dirty the house was. Everything in the house was damp. It smelled like mold. There were bugs on every surface, flies all around the house. It was so bad. The 9 adults who were home at that time, including William and Wanda, were arrested and taken into the station to be interviewed. The remaining adults, which were 5 others, were also eventually taken into the police station for questioning. William denied everything because of course he did, but some of the other adults just told the officers everything. They spoke in detail about what they had done to the children. But by the way that they were talking about it, they were talking about it like it was the most casual thing in the world. And some of them even told investigators that the children were the ones initiating everything because they were asking for it to happen, because they wanted it to happen to them, which is unbelievable. Like, it couldn't actually register in their minds just how messed up and vile and wrong their actions were. They refused to take any responsibility. Some of them didn't even see anything wrong at all with their actions. 13 Goler adults were charged with over 150 different charges for everything that they had done to the children, who were aged from 5 to 14 years old, and they all received jail sentences. But this is going to make you so angry. William was the one that was handed the longest sentence, and guess how long it was? 7 years. Wanda sentenced to 4 years. All of the other adults sentenced to 1 to 3 years. So they served their sentences, and then they just went back to the house and continued living their life, doing God knows what. The children ended up being placed in foster care, and they were happy about that because obviously the way that they were living there was magical in comparison to the way that they were living before. But really sadly, William's 3 daughters that all loved each other very, very much, they were really close, they all got adopted by different families because they couldn't find a family that wanted all 3 of them, which is really sad. And then they ended up losing touch with each other, which is really sad. Again, finding information on this case was so hard. It felt impossible. Like, I was Googling things and I was like, am I like misspelling their name? Like, why can I not find anything? So I think most of the children were adopted, but there's not that much information on it. Yeah, this is one of the ones that like makes you take a step back and think, like, question humanity, because how? Anyway, that is all I have for today's case. Let me know if you guys have heard about this one before. I'm actually curious, and let me know what your thoughts are on it. Thank you for spending time with me today. I hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Also, I know my eyes look so irritated. They probably do in other videos as well, but I have the world's most sensitive eyeballs, so they look really red. Sorry. Love you guys so much, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.